In January 2021, a 40 page called Challenge the Unknown posted an image that came to be known as the Crane's Hollow Dogman. The photograph depicts a four-legged animal, most resembling a wolf, with strange features. The photographer is unknown, and for most, the origins are completely unclear. The Manwolf Files team probes the origins of the photograph, as well as cases that set a precedent for it.
So here we have the photograph of the Crane's Hollow creature. It was actually originally referred to online as the Cran Shallow Road creature, but upon further inspection, the name of that road was actually Crane's Hollow. That's in Amsterdam, New York. That's not the only problem with the image source, however. It first popped up online, at least popularly so, on a Facebook page called Challenge the Unknown. They're a podcast. I spoke with them about where they found the image, and they stated that the image was found on a forum that has since unfortunately ceased to exist. The Challenge the Unknown version of this photograph was posted in January of 2021. So right now, that's essentially the earliest version that we have of this. And it's gone to a few other sources, but the photograph is the same throughout all the sources. And the photograph itself is really quite strange. It seems to show a kind of wolf-like animal or dog-like animal. It doesn't necessarily fit the bill for a typical Dogman report. It's quadrupedal, for one thing, which is kind of in the minority of Dogman reports. But it's also got this very strange anatomy. Plenty of people have pointed out this does not look like a natural quadruped. The problem is, though, is it doesn't really fit the bill for a natural biped either. One feature that you see in these photos is the legs in front of the torso are very oddly long, which might be indicative of a biped, but it also has very long back legs, which the problem with that is normally what you'd see in a natural biped that is related to a natural quadruped. So, example would be, let's say in this case you had a dogman and a wolf. One may be developed from the other, or maybe is at least very similar in anatomy. You would expect that a biped as such would actually have long back legs and short front legs. What that does is it allows for animals to kind of have that swinging motion up and down to where the hips are raised enough to be able to lift the body upwards and also lower it downwards. Unfortunately, this isn't what we really see here. We see that it has this very raised set of both of the leg sets. So what that means is difficult to discern. It might be indicative that it's a hoax because this isn't what you'd expect a natural animal to really look like. That being said, if it is a dogman, if such a thing even exists, it's debatable whether or not the subject would even be a natural animal of any kind. The limbs themselves, even disregarding the ratios of their length, do look kind of strange, especially that front set of legs. There's something kind of off about their orientation. The way that they're positioned doesn't seem as though they're really holding up the animal. So that might be one problem with the photo. Another problem that some people have brought up as a potential issue is that there is this kind of square grouping of pixels that is seen around the creature if you zoom in enough. However, that's not really a valid point, unfortunately, because in any photograph, whether it be in the lowest quality possible or in 8K, you'll find that if you zoom in enough, you'll find these groupings of pixels. It's simply how photos are arranged in a digital format. Unfortunately, without an original source, we don't even know if the idea that this is from Crane's Hollow is a legitimate idea to any extent. We don't know what the original story would tell us. So we unfortunately have a heavy lack of understanding of this photo, and without that, it can be hard to tell if this is faked or not. There's no clear digital signs of a digital hoax, and the anatomy is strange and doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But we are also dealing with a subject that might not make sense in that category in some cases anyway, or at least might not have any clear precedents beforehand. So there is also that issue. It's a rather ambiguous photo. What's interesting about the nature of the photo, of course, is that it's a quadruped. And as mentioned before, that's kind of a minority of dogman reports, but they do happen. Sometimes, people find tracks of canines that are far too big to be any that we have on record at the very least, and that can result in some very interesting findings. And we even have some dogman reports that describe quadrupedal behavior, one of which was actually cataloged by the North American Dogman Project, who of course are very thorough in their cataloging of reports. And one such story, even though it's a minority, was in fact given to them.
Yeah, we pretty much just tracked it down to like a research trip. It was supposed to be a full-fledged episode, but we ended up not using it. Just the interviews are great, the investigation was great, but we didn't. It just didn't feel right, kind of how we shot it. And the investigation yielded some really great evidence, but it's just unfortunate that we didn't get to share it because of that fact. So we ended up doing 2 night investigations on that trip. The first night we found some pretty strange like hair, some gray hair samples that we couldn't quite explain what they were. So we collected those. I've never got those tested. And then the second night, we actually found a set of very large canine footprints in the mud where we were doing our investigation. And we actually hadn't even started the investigation yet. It was still daylight. We were hiking into the woods to find a spot to kind of set up our base camp, and came across these tracks as we were walking. So it was just pure chance and coincidence that we even came across these. And we just Michaela, my co-researcher, just kind of happened to look down and was like, guys, and we all stopped, and they were just everywhere. Like several, it was obviously had to have been several animals, because the tracks were just everywhere. And we took several photographs. We casted one of the tracks that I still have. And yeah, it was about the size of the palm of my hand. The track is, and it's clearly canine. It's not feline. We kind of stood there and Google searched, what mountain lion footprints look like, and it wasn't that. And it was clearly canine of some sort. It was very large. And I've shown it to some people. I know I've shown it to you, and kind of the consensus that seems to come back is it's a gray wolf that must have either migrated down or just kind of been there. And which would make sense given the eyewitness kind of accounts of a large kind of dog man werewolf kind of creature. If you're not used to seeing wolves and you see something that large, and you just kind of associate it with the stories. A lot of them could come down to misidentification. It's like I said, if you've never seen a gray wolf in person. And there are stories of people seeing them, standing up on their hind legs, and yeah, if you don't know these stories, you don't know these traits, you're going to attribute it to the stories of dogmen sightings. And I know in the area we were in is kind of a hotbed for dogmen sightings. Eastern Wisconsin, then you got into Michigan too. You got like the Michigan dogman stuff. And I think it's just kind of a culmination of different things and different stories and people not knowing what they're seeing, especially when you're going out there specifically looking for these things and not just being out there and seeing these tracks. That's kind of like the first thought that hits your mind is like, okay, did we just find what we came looking for, and is it still around? But as we kind of gathered, it like I said, it definitely fit eyewitness reports. We had our own sighting. We found our own evidence that fit what was being reported in the area by other people.
This sighting was submitted to the North American Dogman Project and is actually based out of Reseda, California, which is just outside of Los Angeles. Which as a side note, Los Angeles seems to have a strange history of Dogman sightings. Linda Godfrey has quite a few mentioned in her book Monsters Among Us. They're describing that they live in Reseda, and there's a local park that is across the street from them. It's got a duck pond, it's got tennis court, and they're waiting at the bus stop across the street from the park very early in the morning, 4:45 a.m. And they look across into the park and they see a silhouette of what they thought was a giant dog, and they think maybe a Malamute, or some large breed of dog. They say it's about 30 meters away and it's galloping through the park, but not very fast, just kind of taking its time. It didn't seem to notice them watching it, or if it did, it didn't acknowledge them. And they also said that they were the only person there at the time. So it was just this person and this dog-like creature. And the longer they watched it, they realized it wasn't a dog or a coyote. They said, and I quote, "It looked like a werewolf," because it had very long and lanky front legs, and its rear legs were short, like a hyena's. But it was large. They said that the back was probably about as tall as they were, which is about 5'2". And they didn't know what they were looking at. And they started to get kind of freaked out, and the bus pulls up at that moment. And they sit down on the bus, they look back at the park, and they can still see this thing galloping around in the grass. But it disappeared into the darkness, the bus drives off, and that's all they could make of it. But the story doesn't end there. Less than a week later, their husband and them were walking together, walking their dog through the park, sort of in a secluded area of the park. There's a couple of trees around, and they notice huge claw marks that look like scratches running all the way down the trunk of the tree, of several trees, they said 3. The huge gashes that went up to like 10, 13 feet off the ground. And they'd never seen anything like that before, especially not in an area of the San Fernando Valley like that. I mean, there are no bears that live there. I mean, maybe a cougar, but I mean, 10 to 13 feet tall seems a little high up for a cougar. Apparently, the city ended up removing those trees, and there hasn't been any more damaged trees that they know about since then.
That's interesting.
They also described that over the course of the next several weeks, these trees began to lose their leaves and began to die. I mean, I feel like in a lot of instances with Dogman reports, when you have these quadrupedal sightings, it's hard to differentiate them from, especially if they never stand upright. Like, what differentiates that from a dog? I feel like, there are some dog breeds that are absolutely massive, that normal people that live day-to-day lives in a suburb, if they saw one, would probably think it's a monster, But it's really just an actually large dog, And so I guess my problem with a lot of these quadrupedal sightings, especially if they don't do anything, I guess, Dogman-ish, is like, I'm just going to assume it's a large dog, unless it is like this sighting, the previous sighting that I mentioned, excuse me, to where the body proportions are wrong, to where the front legs are longer than the back legs. It doesn't seem to me, or doing some sort of strange behavior that other dogs don't do, like leaving claw marks on the tree. Not that we know that those two are necessarily connected, but it just, yeah.
Perhaps one of the oddest connections that the Crane's Hollow creature has to another Dogman case is that of the creature of Cross Lake, which is outlined in the book The Michigan Dogman: Werewolves and Other Unknown Canines Across the USA by Linda Godfrey. The report reads as follows. Up ahead on the east side of the highway in the ditch, well outside the tree line, was the biggest wolf I have ever seen. I mean, this was big. It was on all fours, but had its back hunched up like a cat's when they're trying to ward something off. I slowed down rapidly and pulled over, thinking it was going to run off into the woods, but it didn't. It just stood there, staring at me, from about 25 to 30 feet away. There was something very wrong with this picture. It wasn't just a giant wolf. It was built differently. There was something different about the arms and the legs from how a wolf's or a dog's legs are connected or shaped. It had almost human qualities to it. As I took my foot off the brake to punch the gas, I hit the horn. The strange thing that has kept me from talking about it is that it turned around to run into the woods, but stood up and took 5 steps on its hind legs before dropping back down to all fours and running off into the woods.